Yeah. Oh, good morning. Good evening. I forgot I pushed play. Good evening. This is my Wednesday night Bible study. My name is Douglas Griffin. It's May 15th, and I'm teaching from the book of Luke. We've been in the book of Luke for a while. We're in Luke chapter 8. Again, Luke has an interesting perspective because he was a Gentile. So when he did his investigation on the life of Jesus, he heard different things than the other disciples heard, and we all hear different things when there's a conversation, depending on our own perspective. So you kind of get the full picture when you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You get the full picture when you read them all. So in Luke chapter 8, we're starting with verse 22. It says, "Now it happened on a certain day that Jesus got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, 'Let us cross over to the other side of the lake.' And they launched out." Now, Jesus is going to hold them accountable for what he said. He didn't say, "Let's try to cross over and see what happens. Let's hope that we make it. Fingers crossed. Let us cross over to the other side of the lake." And they launched out. So if God says it, that's it. It's going to happen. You don't have to worry about it. We cannot make fun of the disciples because we go through the same panic. God speaks to our heart about a job or about a this or that, and a storm arises and we freak out. Oh no. But nope, it's going to happen. You're okay. He's got you covered. Don't worry about the storm. So in Mark, I would say Mark's version of it, but when Mark tells the story, and again, Mark got his from Peter. Mark chapter 4, verse 35, it says, "On the same day," so the same day that the previous events had happened, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us cross over to the other side." And now, verse 36 of Mark chapter 4 says, "Now, when they had left the multitude," so Jesus is preaching and teaching, and there's always a big multitude following him. And where they are is at the Sea of Galilee. Luke correctly calls it the Lake of Galilee. It's not really a sea, but the people who live there like to call it the sea, but it really was a lake. They're at the Lake of Galilee. So they're up in northern Israel, where the tribes of Naphtali and Asher and Zebulon and Issachar, some of the lesser known brothers, settled. Uh, and right on the other side is Gilead. When I was a little kid, I didn't know the difference between Galilee and Gilead. But there actually is a big difference. Yeah, yes, there is a bomb in Gilead. So on the other side, east of the Jordan River, on the east of the Sea of Galilee, some of the tribes settled, and they weren't supposed to settle there. On the other side, they weren't supposed to settle there. We're going to get to that in just a minute. But anyway, Jesus is preaching around Capernaum, and he says, "Let's get on the boat, and we're going to cross over to go to this other side where those other tribes originally settled, who weren't supposed to settle there, and let's just see what's going on over there." And it says, "And now when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was, but other little boats were also with him." So they took, because sometimes he would sit in the boat and teach, and so it says, "Now let's get in this boat, let's cross over." Okay, but other little boats were with him. So the storm affected everybody, not just Jesus and his disciples. So Jesus and his disciples are in a larger boat, and they're little, maybe 2 men boats with them. Okay, so they're all crossing the Lake of Galilee, the Sea of Galilee, to go to the other side that's not really part of Israel. Luke chapter 8, verse 23. It says, "But as they sailed, he fell asleep." So he stretched out. There's enough room on the boat for Jesus to stretch out. And a windstorm came down on the lake. And again, this is Luke calling it a lake. Everybody's called it a sea. And they were filling with water and were in jeopardy. And that will happen in our lives. The boat that we're using to get across somewhere, it will start to filled with water, and it feels like unstable, and it feels shaky. Doesn't matter. So God never didn't promise his disciples that your boat wouldn't start to fill up with water a little bit, that storms wouldn't come. That's what happens. But if Jesus spoke to you for something to happen, it's going to happen. So they came to him, however, in verse 24, and they awoke him, saying, Master, Master, we are perishing. Not, Master, the boat's filled with water, but we're perishing. This is it. We're all about to die, which was way too dramatic for what was going on. It says, Then he arose and he rebuked the wind and the raging water. So he told the wind to stop. He made the sea calm down, and they ceased, and there was a calm. But he said to them, not, and it says, but he said to them, not, whoo, that was scary, wasn't it? All that storm, child, I'm glad you woke me. He said, where is your faith? I am with you. And I said, let's go to the other side. You think we're perishing? You think this is how it's going to come to an end? God's going to just die on this boat while he's asleep? And they were afraid, it said, of Jesus at that point, and marveled, saying one to another, who can this be? For he commands even the winds and water, and they obey him. They had seen him pray for the sick, and that made sense. Okay, that person got healed. I get that. And you might have gone to a healing service where somebody laid hands and prayed for somebody who was sick and they got better. Commanding the elements is a whole different thing. If you go to a healing service and they point at the roof and say, roof, lift up, and the whole ceiling just lifts, then everybody's going to exit that service, especially if it's a black service. Okay, we're out of here now, because now you're doing big things. Now that's too much. You're doing too much. So telling the winds to stop and the water made them afraid. Like, who? Okay, you healed the cripple man. I'm good with that. But now you can talk to water. Water listens to you. That's a bit much. Okay, so Luke chapter 8. But Jesus is showing them that God is master of distance. Like the centurion came and said, "Please heal my servant." And then he says, "You don't have to come all the way to my house. You can just say a word, and I know my servants will be healed." And so there's no distance with God. I can pray here for you. You can pray for me, and we're in different countries, and it's okay. There's no distance in God. There's no time as far as God is concerned. And now he's the master of the elements. He turns water into wine. He stops the waves. He's painting this picture that he's over everything. Everything. He's the God of everything. So now, they sailed into the country of the Gadarenes, which is opposite Galilee. So this is where the tribe of Gad gathered. Who is Gad? Okay, in Genesis chapter 30, verse 9. Genesis chapter 30, verse 9. It says, when Leah saw that she had stopped bearing. Okay, so Jacob had gone north to run away from his twin brother Esau, and he went to live with Laban, his uncle Laban in Syria. And he wanted to marry Rachel, but he got tricked into marrying Leah. God allowed it because that was plan A and Jacob didn't know it. And so he marries Leah. He has 4 kids with Leah. No kids with Rachel. Rachel brings her maidservant and says, have sex with her. And so he has 2 kids with Rachel's maid. So it says, when Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob as a wife. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. So Leah's already had 4, and now she's claiming number 5, even though it didn't come out of her. That's still mine. And Leah said, a troop comes. And she called his name Gad, which means troop. It means legion. It means army, right? Because now she's got 5 kids, and Rachel still has 0. So it's 5-0. So it's like, oh, I've got a whole troop. I've got a whole legion. So that's what Gad means. It means army, legion, troop. Okay? So Jacob prophesies over Gad toward the end of his life. He prophesies over all of his kids. We read that in the book of Genesis. And here's his prophecy over Gad. He says, Gad A troop shall tramp upon him, but he shall triumph at last. Now, they're using these TR, troop shall tramp and he'll triumph, because in the Hebrew, there's this type of alliteration, and they're trying to, it could have said, a legion shall leap upon him and he shall lean. So they're trying to duplicate what happened in the Hebrew. But basically, a he'll a troop shall trample on him, but in the end he'll triumph. He will be overwhelmed by a troop, even though his name is troop. He'll be overwhelmed by a legion, but eventually he'll receive victory. That's the prophecy over Gad. Now, they were all supposed to go into the promised land. They wandered around the wilderness. God gave them a chance in the beginning of the book of Numbers. And by the way, that's what I just started teaching on Sundays. In the beginning of the book of Numbers, God leads them to the promised land and says, cross over. And they say, no, we don't think so, because there's giants there, so we're not going. And God says, okay, you sure won't. And he has them wander in the wilderness for 40 years until that unfaithful generation passes away, that generation that says no. And finally, this new generation is ready to go. So they're all about to cross over, and 3 tribes change their mind and say, we're after 40 years, we're still not going over. Surprise. So Numbers chapter 32, verse 1, it says, now the children of Reuben and the children of Gad had a very great multitude of livestock. And when they saw the land of Jazer, which is on one side of the Jordan River, and the land of Gilead, that indeed that region was a place for livestock, the children of Gad and the children of Reuben came and spoke to Moses, to Eleazar the priest, and to leaders of the congregation, saying, verse 4, the country which the Lord defeated before the congregation of Israel is a land for livestock. Like the land that we just won this war over on this side of the Jordan, it's a great land for livestock, and your servants, we have livestock. Well, so did everybody else. Therefore, they said, if we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants as a possession. Do not take us over the Jordan. Even though that's where we've been trying to go for 200 years, don't take us over the Jordan. Okay, well, this know that this caused a problem. This caused a big problem. So this is Reuben and Gad. And when we study the book of Numbers, I will go into detail as to the real reason why Reuben, the tribe of Reuben, who's the oldest, and the tribe of Gad, who's the oldest of Zilpah's kids, did not want to go over. Also, Manasseh didn't want to go over. And he was the oldest of Joseph's kids. Okay? In Joshua chapter 22, verse 10, it says, and when they came to the region of the Jordan, which is in the land of Canaan, the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, so only half of them decided they built an altar there by the Jordan, a great impressive altar. So they said, instead of going across, we'll just build our own altar. But don't worry, we won't like worship demons or anything on it. We're just building this altar that just in case, 200 years from now, you guys all forget us. When they come over here to attack us, they'll go, oh, look, they have an altar. They must be just like us. So that we made sure the altar looked just like your altar that's on the other side. But we won't do anything bad on this altar. We promise we won't serve idols and demons. Well, okay. So, of course they did. Of course they did. They refused to cross over the Jordan. And the tribe of Gad, Reuben, and this half of Manasseh, they formed their own little community. And part of it was called the Gadarenes, because the tribe of Gad kind of took over the whole area. And they began to call Gadara, actually. And the region called, the neighborhood called the Gadarenes. And so they were vulnerable to attack. One reason God wanted them to cross over the Jordan is so that the Jordan River would separate them from their enemies, and they'd be aware when it'd be harder for the enemy to attack because they'd have to cross a river in order to get to them. But they were now vulnerable. In fact, in 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 29, it says, in the days of Pekah, king of Israel, what happened in his days while he was king of Israel? Tilgath-Pileser, the king of Assyria, came and took, and it lists Ajan and Abel, Beth Maachah and Genoa and Kadesh and Hazor. Gilead, and Galilee, and all the land of Naphtali, and he carried them captive to Assyria. So all those places where Naphtali lived and where Gilead and all, that's where Gad and them had settled. And he carried them over into Syria, and there was nobody there to protect them because they had refused to join in with their brothers. They were on one side of the Jordan, and they were easy victims. So, what does Jeremiah have to say about them? He says, against the Ammonites, this is Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 1. Against the Ammonites, thus says the Lord, has Israel no sons? Has he no heir? Why then does Milcom inherit Gad and his people dwell in its cities? Why is Milcom? Why have they inherited that region called Gad? Well, who's Milcom? Well, Milcom is another name for Molech, which was a god of the Babylonians. So they've been infested by this Babylonian god, who's not really a god, but they're worshiping idols and they're worshiping demons over there, and that region has now been this region of Gad has now been kind of infested with idol worshippers, demon worshippers, worship of Molech, who's a god of the Babylonians, and that's what's happened in this area because they refused to cross over the Jordan. In fact, in Leviticus 18, chapter 21, it says, "And you shall not let any of your descendants pass through the fire to Molech." Another name for Molech is Milcom. "Nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord." So the God that they were worshiping over in the Gadarenes, that area, was the one where, in order to prove your loyalty, they would send their children through the fire. And if they survived, that meant that Molech protected them. And if they died, that meant that Molech was mad at them. And so God, the real God, the true God, of course, did none of that, had required none of that. But the fake gods always required some nutty thing, some horrible sacrifice or some perversion or some crazy thing that God always warned them against. But Gad and Reuben and those tribes, that's what they wanted, so that's what they got. So this area has been pretty detestable for a while. Jesus, though, wants to go over there because it doesn't matter if there's a terrible area. It doesn't matter if there's gang warfare. It doesn't matter if it's poor or whatever's going on. God still wants to reach out to that area and make a difference. They're in trouble, and it's their own fault, but God doesn't care if it's your fault or not. He's still going to rescue you at some point. But he lets consequences come on you so that you learn, boy, I must have been doing something really wrong. Yeah, that's why these things have happened. And it doesn't mean, again, it doesn't mean every time something bad happens that, God's teaching you some lesson. But there are cases where God's allowing all these consequences because he warned you 59 times, don't do that. And you insisted on doing it. So he has to let the consequences happen. So you go, oh, that's why I shouldn't do that. That's why God warned me all those times not to do that. Okay. So Jesus wants to go over there to the land of the Gadarenes, where the tribe of Gad, again, Gad means troop. Gad means legion. It means mighty army. That's what Leah named him. And that's what that means. So in Luke chapter 8, verse 27, it says, when Jesus stepped out onto the land, there met him a certain man from the city who had demons for a long time. So he's now living up in the hills area, in the graveyard area, but he's from the city of Gad, but he's living up we'll read about him. Okay. Now, interestingly, there really was two guys, but only one of them spoke. And then whenever there was two guys, but only one of them spoke, most of the writers in the New Testament only mentioned that one person because the other one never said anything. It'd be like if you go to some adult and maybe there's a child next to the adult and the child never says anything, but the adult talks to you. Later you will say, oh, I saw Mrs. So-and-so and she said da-da-da, and you don't mention the other person because the other person didn't say anything. So in Matthew chapter 8, verse 28, it says, and when he had come to the other side, to the country of the Gadarenes, there met him two demon-possessed men coming out of the tombs, exceedingly fierce, so that no one could pass that way. So they're demon-possessed men. There's really two demon-possessed men. By the way, and they're clear. They had demons. In Luke, it says they had demons for a long time. Matthew, they had demons. Mark, they had demons. They were demon-possessed. I just want to mention that in Jude chapter 1, verse 6, it says, And the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode. So the angels who did not stay in their place, stay in their lane, but they left where God had placed them, he says, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. So those angels who sinned, he has reserved them in everlasting chains. They're in chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. They're waiting for the judgment day, those angels. And I'm just mentioning this in 2 Peter, verse 2. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. It says, for if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment. If God didn't spare those angels, but he has them chained in chains of darkness, chains to be reserved for judgment. They're chained up. Now, I'm only mentioning this because when you ask somebody, what are demons? They will say, oh, those are the angels that sinned. But the Bible says they are not. That the angels who sinned, the angels who followed the devil when the devil led a revolt against God, that it talks about in the book of Revelation, when those angels who sinned and followed the devil in his rebellion, his very brief rebellion against God, because God kicked him out immediately, those angels are reserved in chains, everlasting chains, and are waiting for the judgment day. It says that in Jude, it says that in 2 Peter. He did not spare the angels who sinned, but he cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment. So then, what are demons if they are not those angels? Because those angels are not on this earth inside of people possessing them. They're somewhere else in chains of darkness. I am not going to answer that question because that's a whole nother, that would take an hour or two. But just know they are not the angels that sinned. Anyway, so these people are demon possessed. And he says, going back to Luke, then chapter 8, verse 28, says, and he wore no clothes. Now, Luke gives it, and this means he had no outer garment. They always say the person was naked, but really they had on underwear. But for everybody else concerned, that was naked. And if somebody was running down the street in their underwear, you say, oh, this man naked running down the street. But he's got underwear. But for all intents and purposes, but Luke includes this detail because Luke always asks, he wanted to know the particular type of demon possession. So Luke always gives more details about what type of fever it was, and because he's a physician, so he took notes. Because sometimes people were foaming. There's different types of demon possession at that time. So he gets very specific. He wore no clothes, nor did he live in a house, but he lived in the tombs. And when he saw Jesus, verse 28, he cried out, he fell down before him. And again, there's two of them there, but only one of them spoke to Jesus. He cried out, fell down before him, and with a loud voice said, what have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me. And you're thinking, well, and you might be thinking, why? What do you mean, do not torment me? Jesus has just got off the boat. How is Jesus tormenting him? Well, we'll find out in a second. In Matthew chapter 8, verse 29, in Matthew's version of this, and again, Matthew was there. Luke is taking notes from everybody who was there. Matthew says, and suddenly they cried out, because again, there's two people saying, and it actually means the demons are crying out, what have we to do with you, Jesus, you Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time? Before what time? Well, judgment day. We know that the angels are reserved until the day of judgment, but these demons somehow are trapped here on the earth, and their time is also coming. They know their day is coming, but there's a reason why they're trapped here on the earth. I don't mean to be so mysterious. I just don't have time to go into it. And I've gone to it in previous lessons before, but they're trapped here on the earth. But they still know that their time is coming. They still know the judgment is coming. So they said, "Have you come to torment us before the time?" Like, that's not fair. You can't do anything to us until the time. We're allowed to be here on this earth until the time, and then we know that we got to go to hell and join the angels. So Luke chapter 8. Why did they suddenly yell at Jesus, "Don't torment us, and you can't torment us until the time"? Luke chapter 8, verse 29. It says, "For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. He had said, 'Come out!'" And that's why they are saying this. So Luke's kind of telling the story in reverse. He's saying what the demons responded. And then he says, here's what Jesus said in order to elicit that response. For Jesus had commanded the unclean spirit to come out. And they're saying, "Please, no, don't make us come out." For it had often seized him. Here's how, again, Luke wants to know the detail, not just that the man is demon possessed, but how is it manifesting itself. For it had often seized him, and he was kept under guard, bound with chains and shackles. And he broke the bonds and was driven by the demon into the wilderness. So he would come out and scream at people and attack them, and it would seize him. And Luke gives detail about this other demon possessed boy who would fall into the fire and he would froth. And Luke just likes to say, this is what happened with this demon, here's what happened to that demon. And demon possession takes different forms. It affects people differently depending on the type of demon inside the person. Again, we don't have to worry about this much in the United States. We have so much light. There's so many churches and so much the word going forth that we're not like one of those countries where you can go from obsession, from oppression, from being oppressed by a demon to being obsessed and then eventually possessed. That doesn't happen often in this country, but it happens a lot in other countries who don't have as much light. So in this country, this demon would seize him, they would chain him up, and he would break the chains because he'd had the superhuman strength, and he would be in the wilderness and he'd wander in the tomb. He loved being around dead men's bones. That's another clue as to who these demons are. In fact, I call this lessons, what do I call this? Demons in graveyards and pigs. Oh my. Exactly. So he breaks the chains and he's screaming and now Mark says in chapter 5, verse 5, when Mark talks about this, he says, "And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones." You may know or have heard of people who cut themselves. Not somebody who's tried to kill themselves and slit their wrists, but people who kind of are obsessed with marking their body and cutting themselves. They may not be possessed by a demon, but they're certainly being oppressed, and Satan's whispering them, and they become obsessed with cutting themselves. And so this demon would do that, and that's how he would manifest himself in the man, besides running around crazy. So Jesus, in Luke chapter 8, verse 30, Jesus asked him, saying, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion," because many demons had entered him. Legion. He basically said, "My name is Gad," because that's what Gad means. Legion, troop, army. He's in the Gadarenes. "What do you mean, what's my name?" "It's Gad. We've been here for a long time." And in Mark chapter 5, verse 10, it says that the demons begged him earnestly that he would not send them out of the country. Don't send us somewhere else, because our name is Gad. This is Gadara. We've been here for a long time. Don't send us out of this country. This is where we've been ever since that altar was built 1,200 years ago, and we started worshiping Molech, and all this other stuff started going on here. So, this is our country. Don't leave us. Don't make us go. Verse 31 of Luke chapter 8. And they begged him that he would not command them to go into the abyss. So we don't want to leave this country. Don't send us into the abyss. You can't send us into hell yet. Don't send us into the abyss. send us anywhere else, but you can't command us to go to the abyss yet. We belong here. This is our country. We don't want to leave this area. So verse 32 says, now a herd of many swine was feeding there on the mountain. So that's where the tribe of Gad, Reuben had gotten to. God had said, don't eat swine and pig, because certainly at that time they did not know how to clean the swine and the pig, and it would make them sick. They'd have all kind of diseases. There's someone we know of who ate uncooked pork, and a worm, because the uncooked pork could have worms in it, got into his brain. And so God is protecting them, the Jewish people, without explaining all that stuff and saying, just don't eat pig because you don't know how to cook it yet. Refrigerators haven't been invented and convection ovens, and so just don't eat it. But Reuben and Gad and them, they're mixing with the Gentiles who don't know any better yet. And so there's all kind of pigs and swine in their country. So a herd of swine was feeding there in the mountain, so they begged him that he would permit them to enter them. Don't send us out of the country. Don't send us into the abyss. Don't send us before the time is not time yet. Send us into those pigs, because we want to possess something. So I'll just say, without showing you the 40 scriptures that back this up, as I've done in other times, because maybe another time I will do that, that it is possible that before man was on the earth, that Satan, there are scriptures that imply that Satan was here and that there were creatures here, that Satan had his throne. Satan had a throne, because remember, Satan says, I was on my throne over the Most High God. That Satan had a throne and worshipers, and that God, when he judged Satan, he judged not only the angels that followed him in his revolt, but the creatures that were here on the earth before man, that were following Satan. And the spirits of those creatures are still here. They're just trapped on earth, and they seek to express themselves. So they'll try to express themselves through humans. If they can't express themselves through humans, they'll express themselves through an animal. So don't send us, if we have to come out of this man, send us into those pigs, because we still seek expression. So, okay, so they begged him that he would permit them to enter them, and he permitted them. Fine, you can go to those pigs. Then the demons went out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd, who are now full of demons, ran violently down the steep place into the lake and drowned. So if there's a legion had more than 6,000 people in it. So if there's 6,000 demons in this one man or in these two men, they go into this herd. Each pig now has hundreds of demons in them, and they know better than to, so I'm being possessed. I can't abide that. So they're driven over the cliff and into the lake, and they drown. Verse 34, when those who fed them saw what had happened, they fled and told it in the city and in the country. So again, the man's not living in the city. He's from the city, but he's now living in the tombs and the graveyards with demons and graveyards and pigs. Oh my. And then they went out to see what had happened, because these people were like, oh my God, did you guess what just happened? And they came to Jesus, and they found the man from whom the demons had departed just sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid, as opposed to say, oh, praise the Lord, this man's been healed. And I'm telling you, I've seen that, saw a demon-possessed man who just looked fierce and crazy, and he's frothing. And I saw the preacher cast a demon out of the man. And it appears there are times you need to know the name of the demon if they won't just come out. And again, in our lifetime, we're not going to run into that many demon-possessed people, so you don't have to know this. There are people who are so excited about casting out demons, they just cast demons out of everything, because like, ooh, I got a superpower, I can cast out demons. No, you don't. We don't have any superpower like that. If God leads you to cast out a demon, God will tell you. But otherwise, don't just, because they cast out demons out of everything, and everything's a demon. Demon, come out of that mailbox. They'll just, and there's no demon. They're just making stuff up. So the people just get demon crazy. But sometimes there are demon possessed people, and if you say come out, and it won't come out because it's supposed to come out instantly. You don't have, there's no drama. In the name of Jesus, come out. Demon has to come out. But if it doesn't, sometimes you need to know the name. And so Jesus says, "What is your name? We are legion." Then he cast them out. So I saw this man cast the demon out, and the man who was frothing it, when he got up off the ground, he looked like a total different person. Just smiled, it looked like he had lost 40 pounds and just handsome man, smile like he had changed. It was phenomenal. So they find this man whom the demons had departed sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed, no longer naked, and in his right mind. And they, which frightened, we all applauded. Praise the Lord, we're all weeping. They were so used to demons in that part of the world and craziness that it made them scared. They also, who had seen it, told them by what means he'd been, by what means he who had been demon possessed was healed. Like it was Jesus who did it. He just said, "Come out," and they went out. Then the whole multitude of the surrounding region of the Gadarenes asked Jesus to depart from them. You need to get out of here, Jesus, with all that healing people and stuff. Now, Jesus, again, in that area, news of this spread, but Jesus needed to cross over and heal this man that everybody had heard about because somebody in that area was going to get excited about it and know, okay, there's a man who's able to cast demons out. There's a man who's able to do something. The people who had lived it with for so long were not ready for the change. And sometimes we can get so used to some crazy thing that we don't want the change. It's weird, but like, no, I've got this limp. Don't you cure my limp? So they didn't, it's like, no, get out of here. You're messing everything up. We totally understood how our ecosystem worked. But if you're going to go around healing people, that's too much. But still, Jesus crossed over on purpose, knew what he was doing. There's somebody there. When I heal him, word will spread. It will not instantly be liked, but word will eventually spread to the people who want to know. And later, 5 years from now, when my disciples come to this part and begin to preach, they're going to have big crowds because words will have spread to the right people, and they'll want to know that same Jesus. They'll want to know about it. So Jesus makes us, and sometimes there may be somebody that we deliver or somebody that we heal or somebody whose life we change, and we expect, oh, everybody's going to be so excited, and people not necessarily excited about it. But it doesn't matter if we see instant results. Down the road, somebody will find out. Somebody will see the change in that person, and it will affect them. It may not be the change that we wanted to see instantly happen. Oh, when this happens, everybody's going to applaud and scream. No, people may be upset. But eventually, the right people will find out about that change, and good things will happen from it. So they asked him to get out of there. It says, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into a boat and returned. He said, okay, and I'm done. I'm out. I did what God told me to do, and I'm out. On that note, so in verse 38, it says, now the man from whom the demons had departed begged him that he might be with him. Jesus, can I go with you, please? But Jesus will send him away saying, return to your own house and tell what great things God has done for you. Because this didn't happen so that you could leave here and come with me. This happened so that you can go back home and be a witness. Because they've seen you be crazy your whole life. And now that they see that this change has happened, it will affect them. So he went his way and proclaimed throughout the whole city what great things Jesus had done for him. In Matthew and in Mark, it says through all of Decapolis. And Decapolis is where we get the word decade, deca, which means 10. There were 10 different cities that he went throughout, not just, he went through his city, but he also went throughout that whole region preaching. And there's nothing anybody can do about it. They'd seen him crazy, and now he was healed. And sometimes God lets a certain thing go on, like, why won't God fix this? Because he's letting it actually swell up so that when he does fix it, it's even that much bigger of a change. Now, he didn't cause the thing to mess up in the first place, but he's delaying sometimes. He's definitely coming through because he's the God that comes through. But when it happens, people will be stunned, where before they may not have noticed. Oh, he healed your headache? Oh, he healed your cancer? Okay, now I got to deal with this God. He's got to be real because I saw how bad that was. And to see how it is now, I've got to fall down on my face and know that there's a God. But if you just say, oh, I had a headache and God healed it, whatever. So sometimes, not all the time, sometimes it's okay that things get worse and worse and worse because when God comes through, and He will, that change will affect people in such a way, that it's better for them that it got worse, if that makes sense. But that's just sometimes. It's not like, and God will always make things get worse. No, but just know that sometimes, even though it's getting worse, God can still hit it, heal it, and the deliverance will make even a bigger impression. Okay, so that's all I'm doing with this, man. I thank you so much for your time. We will continue in the book of Luke, in the 8th chapter of Luke. Such a good book. So many good things happen. All right, and on Sundays, like I said, we're in the book of Numbers, where we'll go into more detail as to why Reuben and Gad and all those tribes refused to go across the Jordan after all that time. Book of Numbers is really interesting books. A lot of action, a lot of good stuff. All right, thank you again for listening in, and I will see some of you this weekend. No, I won't see you, but I'll be teaching to some of you this weekend, and others I'll be teaching you again next week. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.